I don't want to waste your time, so there won't be an intro. Starting next week, Themepark is going to replace Bank in a competitive map pool, and that was quite a controversial decision. I personally like Bank a lot, and I don't think it was 100% figured out yet, but I also like the idea of getting a totally new map. And honestly, Themepark isn't as bad as people think it is. At least it won't be in competitive play. What I want to do in this video is basically focus on the throne room objective and try to make some predictions as to how it could play out in Pro League. Obviously, I will be off by a bit, because pros have been screaming Themepark for a few weeks now, while the only experience I have with Themepark are ranked games on PlayStation. But it still could be interesting to see how I would approach a totally new map, so let's get into it. Throne and Armory is probably one of the only bomb sites in Siege that is not directly connected to any outside walls or windows at all, and that's probably a big part of why it's so strong and ranked. I think the closest comparison you can make to an already existing bomb site is comparing it to Aviator Games on Villa. On both, there is no outside access into the objective itself, but there are these buffer rooms, Study on Villa and Barrels on Themepark, where it's pretty much impossible for a defender to play in. So that's why they're kind of similar, with the only exception that on Themepark there are buffer rooms on both sides of the objective. But nevertheless, these two sites do actually play out very differently. And that becomes obvious when we look at the default Aviator attack. For that, the idea is to start on the east side of the map, taking control of Master and Astro, and then push from that side until you have landing and 90 control. At this point, teams usually send Hibana over to Study Balcony, so she can apply pressure from the other side. But if we apply this line of thinking to Themepark, it doesn't really work out. But first, I need to switch to blueprints to get rid of the blur, and I want to give you some orientation. This is Arcade, this is Barrels, this is Throne, this is Maintenance, and this is Yellow Stairs. Okay, the equivalent of that master attack on Villa would be to start by taking control of the east side, then you breach Maintenance, and once that is open, that would be the time where you want to rotate Hibana over to Barrels. And that's the problem. On Villa, Hibana can stay outside Study on the balcony, but on Themepark, Hibana actually needs to physically be inside Barrels to apply pressure, which is just not going to happen. Because if we look at it from the defender's point of view, it's really not that big of a deal if only one of the walls is open. You can still play on the other side of Throne, and there are still a lot of crossfires from Armory. But if you allow the attackers to open both walls, then it gets problematic. So what you need to do as a defender is to heavily hold onto the side where the attackers aren't breaching first. So if the attackers are breaching Maintenance, you need to hold Barrels, and if they breach Barrels first, you need to hold Maintenance. And that should easily be possible, even if you end up having to play a 1v2 on that side. So understanding this idea will basically guarantee that there will only ever be one breach your anchors need to deal with. All in all, I just don't see a viable way of opening both walls of Throne. One, sure, but never both. And that's even with ignoring the fact that there's also a top floor we need to worry about. Because whenever you're trying to attack a ground floor objective, you will never get away with not having any kind of top floor control. There are viable ways of just playing a horizontal attack, on coast and border for example, but a sunrise take on a coastline kitchen attack still requires a player in hookah to watch flanks. And similarly, there are two strong ways of attacking vents on border, which are horizontal in nature, but they combine it with vertical aspects. The first one is the office teller's take, where you first take office, but instead of clearing the entire top floor, you stop at fountain, leave a player up there, and then have the rest of your team focus on tellers and toilets. And the other one is where you basically do the same thing, but mirrored. You take CC and Armory control first, but instead of actually pushing into Armory, you just make sure the defenders can't use the holes in bunker. And after you have control of that, you focus on applying pressure from main door, stock, and customs. As you can see, all three of those kind of follow the same core principle. You take top floor map control until you get into a position where it's easy to protect the flank of the teammates below you. And I can kind of see that working for Throne Room too. Option number one would be to clear the east side of the top floor until the lanes converge here, and after parking a flank watch player over there, you then take the east side of the ground floor. I especially like having a player in this room, because he can eliminate flanks from that hallway, which means that the 3 remaining players in Dragon and Maintenance can put their entire attention towards side. And option number 2 would be to take the west side of the top floor first, again until you get to this point where the lanes converge, and after that you take the west side of the ground floor and breach barrels. Basically the same thing but mirrored. Both of these options have their pros and cons. Generally, it's probably stronger to have barrels control than it is to have maintenance control, because in barrels you have at least some kind of solid cover that will help you in gunfights, but at the same time, having access to the western part of the top floor is a lot worse than having access to the eastern part. Because while the floor above throne room isn't destructible, the floor above armory very much is. And I think that on this bomb site, or on defender-sided maps in general, the attackers want to force gunfights in order to create some kind of opening, and the best way to do that is to open the floor above the defenders. So in conclusion, the east side take is probably better than the west side take. If you're wondering why we don't just clear the entire top floor, that's because that would be way too expensive, I think. But what do I mean by expensive? On a macro scale, the attackers have 3 resources at their disposal: time, manpower, and utility. And every square meter of map control comes at a price, because you have to drone it out, which puts your utility at risk, and you have to actually walk there, which costs time, and if you need to win a gunfight, it might cost manpower. So you always have to ask yourself whether the additional benefit you get from having more map control is worth the additional cost of getting more map control. If we take a look at a consulate garage attack, for example, most teams think that the reward of clearing the entire map is worth the associated costs. But that is mainly due to the fact that roaming on the top floor isn't actually that strong. Because of how many ways there are to cut off rotations, top floor roamers are mostly relegated to playing in the yellow, front desk and CO area. For the attackers, this means that taking map control on the eastern half of the top floor costs basically nothing, because if there aren't any defenders, there is no risk of your drone getting destroyed. It's only when we get to this area here where taking map control suddenly gets expensive. But apparently, teams generally consider this a worthwhile investment. Applying this concept to Themepark again, we can see how taking the entire map is probably too expensive. I mean, even getting into the map seems kind of difficult, and after that, there are no natural ways to cut off rotations, so you kind of end up having to drone and clear out every single room individually. And what's going to happen is that defenders will start to contest you very early, like in cache or initiation, and then they will shoot drones while continuously falling back to either lobby or yellow stairs. And sure, you will eventually get top floor control, but what are you even doing with that? You still won't be able to breach both barrels and maintenance, because you lost too much time, utility and manpower already. And you also have to remember that if you take map control, you need to think about a way to keep map control, which is going to be somewhat difficult because of the 3 stairways. All in all, taking the entire top floor doesn't seem to justify the costs, so my bet is that teams are going to stick to clearing only the east or only the west side of the top floor. Now, there's one more aspect of attacking throne that I haven't touched on yet. How are you actually supposed to breach the wall into throne? You cannot get directly above or below the wall, and it's also impact trickable for the defenders. The way you usually open walls like that, for example the Claphouse cache to construction wall, is by throwing an EMP to get rid of Mute, Bandit or Kate, then shooting Hibana pellets at the bottom of the wall so they can't be impact tricked, then you Sophia stun over the wall to deny Bandit trick, and then you throw another EMP to deny the Kate trick. Obviously, you don't need all of that all the time, but you also don't really know what exactly you're facing on the other side, and if you do it like that, you're guaranteed to have at least a Hibana-sized foothold in the wall. And usually, that's enough to get 2 more Hibana charges onto the wall, because now it's much harder to impact trick. But that doesn't really apply to Themepark. The throne itself is slightly elevated, and there's this small wall, which means that your feet aren't even exposed to the first Hibana hole. If anything, that just makes it easier to impact trick, because you can now use the Hibana hole to do it. And yes, there is an angle from control that lets you look over the wall into throne, but it's not enough to stop the impact trick. At this point, we basically have two options. The first one would be to copy what some teams are doing on Clubhouse to counter the kitchen hedge impact trick, which is just Hibana shooting all 3 charges onto the hedge, one after the other. And because defenders only have 2 impacts, the third Hibana charge will always break the hedge. So what we could do on Themepark would be to just use our Hibana charges to waste impacts, only to then breach the wall with Thermite. But that's not exactly a long-term solution, and also, the other solution is a lot easier. You just use Maverick to open the wall. During the Invitational, we have actually seen quite a few teams just not bringing Hibana or Thermite, and instead relying on Maverick to open walls, even if you can't repel on them. And honestly, that's been working out a lot better than I expected. Obviously, there is a risk of them shooting your feet while you're opening the line at the bottom, but if you start on the left side and walk towards the right while you're opening it, there's actually no way the defenders can shoot you. You just really have to make sure that you correctly open the left side, because you won't get a second chance if you screw up. But honestly, that's still by far the easiest way to open this wall, and I expect this to be the main way of opening walls anywhere on Themepark. Especially because it won't be affected by possible Thatcher, Thermite or Hibana bans. Alright, so now we have control of the entire east side, top and bottom floor, and we have one of the walls towards throne open. What happens next? Now we slowly get into the territory where there's not too much to gain by following a strategy anymore. At this point, you just need to get the kills on site, either by focusing on the throne player from Breach and Dragon Door, or by getting a kill on the armory player from above. But there are not really any smart ways left that could help you with that. At least I didn't find any. I guess you could smoke off armory from Dragon Door in order to isolate the throne player, but that would be about it. And that's also the reason why this spot will be defender favored. There's just no easy way to win these crucial gunfights on site. Alright, so now I basically covered everything about macro strategy that I wanted to cover. But I thought it would be cool to basically simulate an entire round. Obviously that could end up being hilariously wrong, but here we go. Thatcher is banned, and the defenders are playing a hold that heavily relies on impact tricking whichever side the attackers choose to come from. All major walls are muted, and there are enough ADS to stop nades. Mute and Maestro start inside the objective, Valk, Jaeger and Mozzie start spread around the map, so they can contest the attackers right when they're trying to enter the building. Our attackers are playing an east side take with Maverick, Zofia, Buck, Jackal and Lion, where we focus on clearing the top floor first. Maverick and Buck are droning for Lion and Jackal, while Zofia already takes control of the ground floor east side. The defenders are contesting Vault and Initiation, but after shooting 2 drones, they are forced to fall back because of the Lion and Jackal scans. Now that the attackers have east top floor control, they leave Lion to watch flank, and Buck starts opening the floor above armory. Meanwhile on the bottom floor, Maverick is opening maintenance wall, Jackal is watching Dragon Door, and Zofia is holding 90 flank. At this point in the round, the defenders send one of their roamers to reinforce site, and the other one rotates into Drug to make sure that the attackers can't rotate into barrels to breach the second wall. And the last defender is still on the top floor looking for a flank play. Buck gets a kill through the floor in armory. Jaeger thinks this is an opportunity to trade Buck by flanking, but he dies to Lion. And shortly after, Valk rotates into armory to fill Mute's position and manages to C4 Buck. It is now a 4v3 with 45 seconds left. The maintenance wall is now open. Zofia is placing a drone in 90 so Buck can hold the flank for her, and because our Lion is played by Laxing, he crouch walks toward lobby stairs in order to late flank during the execute. The defenders are in an alright position, but because Lion destroyed the lobby default cam, Mozzie rotates into toilets, so he is in a position to deny both a yellow and lobby backstab, while also being in position to flank Dragon himself. The attackers drone out both Maestro and Valk one last time, and then try to go for gunfights. Maestro manages to kill both players on Breach because his gun has 80 bullets, but Zofia ends up killing him from Dragon Door. That is Lion's cue to also push into site, but he loses the gunfight to Mozzie, who was also about to rotate back. And finally, Zofia loses a close range gunfight against Valkyrie, and the defenders win the round. Obviously, the whole thing is just made up, and like I said before, I haven't seen any kind of high-level gameplay on Themepark yet, so my predictions might be off by quite a bit. If you think that some of my assumptions were wrong, let me know in the comments, and the big brain play here would be to do so before we get to see Themepark in Pro League for the first time. Anyways, this is how I see the throne room objective being played out. It certainly seems to be pretty defender-sided, but honestly, I'm not even sure if Armory Throne is actually going to be the best side in Pro League. At the moment, I'm kind of tinkering around with a few different top flow setups that are based on the idea of not even letting the attackers into the map, and that seems quite promising, but it's not ready for the public yet. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this look at the latest Pro League map, and I hope you were able to learn something from the way I approach thinking about the map. If you have any opinions on which kind of attacks or defenses you think are going to be strong in Pro League, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.